up we have Miami-Dade County. They're working with the Regulatory and Economic Development Department there, RER for short. They've also had generous support from the Knight Foundation and the Miami Foundation. So Sophia, Matthias, and Ernie, who's also formerly the coach for Miami brigade captain, were tasked with making sense of and improving the permitting process, which I can tell you is definitely not an easy thing in a county of 2.6 million people. Up next, Matthias is going to talk about their work.
All right. So Miami is a little bit different. Over half the population is foreign-born, and over a third of the population doesn't really speak English very well. But Miami really has some differences to go beyond the demographics, and it's been changing throughout the years, not just in demographics and in population, but also in terms of jurisdictions. As you can see here, Miami has a really complex structure. It has over 34 municipalities that accompany about 1.5 million of its residents, and another 25 unincorporated communities that have another 1 million residents. And these jurisdictional boundaries are kind of in flux as new cities are annexed and added into the mix. And it's really confusing for residents to be able to tell what jurisdiction do I now fall in? Where are my services coming from? And that complexity is kind of added by the fact that your mailing postal address might still say Miami, Florida, even though you're not in the city of Miami, you're in the city of Hialeah or the city of Doral. And then as well as the fact that some of these cities are so small that once they incorporate, they still contract out their services to the county. So people are left not knowing where's my service coming from, what area am I in, or is my business in. So we borrowed a page out of the 2013 Las Vegas Fellowship and redeployed their tool called Am I in Las Vegas, and aptly titled it Am I in Miami. This is a really simple tool, but actually a pretty powerful way for people to have access to vital information. You enter your address, you find out where am I in this region, and that's actually a pretty important thing. Am I in a municipality? Which municipality? Am I in an unincorporated area? With the goal of further adding what services come from where. Because your service could come from the unincorporated area, it could come from the municipality, and that's unclear. So this is all kind of around the idea of giving people access to their information and bringing them into the arena so that they can engage with the process. But we were tasked by the Regulatory and Economic Resources Department of Miami-Dade County with working on the permitting process, which, as Nicole mentioned, is really complex. We have to deal with about 7 or 8 departments, varying depending on the type of permit. And as you might know, that a lot of departments don't really talk very well together. So it's a really difficult process to navigate, and at the same time, a lot of these, this process is undergoing a massive process overhaul and a software overhaul as the consolidation of these departments is undergoing right now. So we looked at this process and we thought, well, this is really complex. How do we enter into a process that's kind of in flux and that is also really complex? We have 11 months to have a meaningful impact and have it sustain and hopefully scale. So we started asking ourselves some questions. We started looking at how do we make these services accessible, and then after they're accessible, how do we get users to engage with them? And then how do we provide feedback so that these services can then be improved? So where we started was with a process design mapping session with members of the government. We looked at a specific process called the short-term event permitting process, things for like holding seasonal events like a fireworks sale or a Christmas tree sale or a musical festival, things like that. We chose it because it was really complex in the fact that it involved almost all of the departments that were involved in the permitting process, and also was really hard to tell how to operate within this process given the information that was available publicly on the website. So we got all of the stakeholders in a room for half a day in the county, sat them down and had them draw out how the process worked from their perspective. This process is called drawing elephant, as you see in the slide, but it's called that because no one can really see the entire massive process from their perspective. So we're trying to get everyone to put their perspective forward so that there can be a consensus that is reached. And the process went really well. We had people that hadn't met before, that were working on the same process. They were reaching a consensus on how things work. There was active discussion and debate, and at the end of it, we had a really great resource. And that was an amazing win. But what do you do once you have the information available, once people can engage with it and start using it? How do you improve it? How do you make sure that it's meeting their needs? Well, you don't do it like this. This is the feedback form that's available for the building department. And there's a lot to be desired here. It's only available in English. And as I mentioned, over a third of the population doesn't speak English very well. It's only available in paper format. So you have, and only on one location, so you have to be on site to fill this out. It's a little bit difficult to find. A lot of people that we talked to at that location didn't know where it was, even though it was posted in various areas. It's also asking the wrong questions. It's geared more towards giving feedback on the frontline individuals and staff that work there, rather than the process or recent changes. And it didn't really ever update. It was implemented in 2007, and it's kind of stayed the same. Another strange pattern that we noticed about this feedback form is that the feedback was really, really positive, overwhelmingly positive, and people were leaving their contact information, which is a little bit unusual for feedback. Usually, feedback is a little bit more on the critical side, and people like to remain anonymous. So why was this happening? Well, there's a cultural context that's really relevant in Miami. Miami is kind of a relationship town. As I mentioned, there's a lot of people moving in and out. There's a lot of people that are new to this country. A lot of people that are bringing in different ways that they engage with their government from previous cultures. And the way that people were engaging with this forum was they were using it as kind of like a quid pro quo with the staff, as kind of like a feedback survey version of putting donuts in front of a bureaucrat to maybe grease the wheels. And this is not how the form is meant to be used. But nothing was changing. That process remained, and it was continuing to be used that way. And after 7 or 8 years, when we stumbled upon it, it's still being used and not being noticed. The other problem is that for those few people who did actually put in honest feedback, there was a perception that it wasn't going anywhere. This is a quote from one of the users that we met when we asked them why they were sharing, when they were sharing this really useful, insightful feedback with us, sitting at a table inside of the building department, why they didn't fill out a form. And they didn't believe that it went anywhere. They said we would fill this out if it went to the mayor, if we fill it out if it went to the legislator, the commissioner, but it's going to end up somewhere in middle management. And that's a really dangerous perception. And unfortunately, it was being backed up by the fact that it wasn't going anywhere. So their perception was reality. The county has undergone a major consolidation of departments, from 50-some departments to 20-some departments for the last couple of years, and along with that, they lost about 10% of their staff. So a process like aggregating and analyzing this data really kind of fell to the wayside, and yet it was still going. They were still kind of underscoring and enforcing this process that was going nowhere, telling people that it's going nowhere, but the few people who put in the honest feedback. And so this data collection process is kind of left to die on the vine. It's sitting there and going, and there's really a lost opportunity there. So how do we actually get to complete that feedback that is left open when people put in feedback and are trained to gradually stop giving honest information that can be used to improve the service? How do we build that capacity back into a department? That is what we're looking to do. How do we get into and complete that feedback loop so that we encourage and build that muscle that people will then continue to contribute information that is valuable and iterative? So we do that by making it easier for people to give feedback. We do it by making it easier for people to then, for the government to use that feedback and make each party see value in the process so that they can actually be encouraged to do the process. It's a partnership. So how do we accomplish this? Well, we are approaching this by combining valuable data that's behavioral and within the process in call centers, and data that's captured in like software databases through these systems. And we're making this data available and combining it with better survey data that is coming from digital sources, web and SMS, and then putting that data where people can find it in multiple languages, in Spanish and English. So these are just mock-ups and wireframes, but this is what the process would look like on the government side in terms of creating a survey. Someone would be able to create a survey, be able to translate it into Spanish, and then have it be pushed out in both web and SMS versions. This is important in a couple of ways. One is that people are able to push this out and iterate based on the responses they get. If their questions aren't really hitting the spot, if they're not getting the feedback, or if they release a new service and they want to get feedback specific to a new service or a potentially upcoming service, they can do that. The links will be by a phone number and by a URL, and those don't have to change. They don't have to go through a massive process to release new posters, go through the print shop within the county, and have all those come over. Those barriers are removed, and that process and that time is removed. Additionally, they're digital, so you don't need a person to sit there and aggregate and pull all the numbers when people currently draw a line through all the fives in 1 to 5 scale. We can get that data and aggregate it. There's no excuse to not have the data. On the back end, there's the dashboard where the metrics and visualizations of the data will be shown to the government user. But more importantly, this data isn't just being shown to the government, it's also showing the citizens how this data is being put to work, as this will be visible to both the government workers and the citizens. So we're then closing that feedback loop. Now, our next steps with this are to continue to build a working prototype and then go out and test it with the aims that by the end of the fellowship we can scale this to another department of the county so that this can become like a county-wide process for gathering user feedback and implementing it into service design. And what we're developing isn't necessarily a really unique technical solution, but it is a unique process solution in terms of using government or using user feedback to implement government design. Thank you.